Okay, so back to the show, Dog and Pony Show. We're going to be talking about shared and certified data sets. So this is all about Power BI. And so Power BI is a very cool platform. We love it for a variety of reasons. However, there is a bit of an issue. When people adopt Power BI, they tend to want to solve two problems, but they're unaware of the fact that they are indeed two separate problems because they often look like one single problem. People will say something along the lines of, I want one version of the truth and the ability to do ad hoc mashups of non-official data. Any particular data set in Power BI can solve one of these problems, but it's going to do so at the expense of the other. So if you want to solve these, you solve them in different ways using different approaches. Now, historically, you kind of only had two solutions, and they were okay, right? If all you wanted to do was mash up data, well, that's super duper easy. You could just open up Power BI Desktop and go ahead and load data from all kinds of different sources, mash them up and do whatever you want with them, and go ahead and publish that report. This is what we would call a single-use Power BI model. For every single report in Power BI, the person just spins up their own data model. It works out pretty well, but there's a problem, right? This sort of cuts against the notion of one version of the truth, because within a particular organization, you will have 10, 20, 30, 100 different Power BI reports out there, and they all have very similar data models that tell you similar things, but oftentimes they will have sort of multiple versions of the truth. You'll have a notion such as margin percentage, and it's being calculated slightly differently each time. So to get around that, to have one version of the truth, an organization could adopt what's called an analysis services model, right? Now, behind the scenes, if you were to actually crack open a Power BI report, you would see that it actually is an analysis services model, but there's an official version of analysis services, right? And this will live on an organization's server, and what this will do is IT will go ahead and build this, and this will be the data set that other people can build reports off of. So you'll have one data set that has all of your different categories and all of your different measures, and you could just connect to it like a good old cube, and you could drag and drop stuff into your Power BI report. And if there's 20 or 30 different Power BI reports that are all connected to this same analysis services model, even though they're showing different visuals, all the calculations are being done exactly the same way. You have one version of the truth, which is good, but there's a big cost associated with this. These things are not easy to spin up, right? These analysis services models tend to require assistance from IT, right? So, whoops, get ahead of myself. So, the idea behind these is fantastic, but when you go to actually build it, you're going to require help from IT. Sometimes you have to hire and fire and then rehire expensive consultants. It can be quite an ordeal, right? So Microsoft does a very good job at solving the ad hoc mashups problem. In terms of one version of the truth, for a long time, you didn't really have a super satisfying solution because this was often too expensive for smaller organizations. In comes shared and certified data sets, right? This is sort of a smaller scaled down version of an analysis services model. Now, underneath the hood, it's the same hardware, but it's much, much easier to build, right? Rather than requiring IT to build this for you, power users within your organization can go ahead and build a data set, right? And they can publish it, and then lots of different report authors can connect to it just as if it were an analysis services model without all that extra work from IT and external developers and things like that. This is a really great solution because power users can build these and support these at a pretty low cost to the organization. So this is a very spiffy new solution. I guess it's not that new at this point. It's about 6-7 months old. With these shared and certified data sets, semi-technical people in your organization, not non-technical people, but semi-technical people, can create these data sets using regular old Power BI desktop. And when you publish them, other people in your organization can connect to these data sets and publish reports across several different workspaces. Now, there's several cool things about this. It is a single source of the truth, which is good. It's also usable by other report authors. However, both of these two bullet points have actually been solved before using a less good solution. What's awesome about these new shared and certified data sets is they're usable across app workspaces. So if I publish something in my sales app workspace, somebody in the, I don't know, marketing app workspace can create a report off of my data set. You didn't used to be able to do that, and that really opens up a lot of possibilities. Also, these new shared and certified data sets, they have a label of trust on them. So if you've got a data set, somebody in your organization, you could say, hey, I want to certify this and say that this thing is indeed worthy of trusting. And you can have an official process in your organization to do that. That really makes these things quite powerful. So actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop for questions real quick. Any questions here? And again, you can just jump in on top of the microphone. I'll give you a second. I don't know how versed some folks are in Power BI. Our user group is just Power BI. So if you're like, what's Power BI? I can answer that question too. Might take a few minutes. Going once, going twice.
Question, is this feature available on levels of Power BI Pro and Enterprise?
Yeah, so this does require Power BI Pro licenses to work. Frankly, the Power BI free license should really be called a Power BI developer's license. As soon as you want to share assets in any way, shape, or form, you need to bump up to either Power BI Pro or Power BI Premium. So it does require that, but that's all it requires. Once you've got that and a tenant manager who's happy enough to turn on the feature, it just works. Okay, I saw a little thing up here that said there was some more. There's some stuff in chat. Oh, hey, look, it says chat right there. Will it tell me what the chat is? No, it'll just tell me that people, oh, hey, there we go.
Are there any workflow recommendations for healthcare or medical research models?
Not particularly for that modality. We're going to get into sort of how you deploy these things in a little bit. And I think generally it's kind of one size fits all. You don't really have different approaches across different industries.
And then another question, which I think you're going to get to later.
Yep.
How do you recommend securing these shared data sets? And can you walk us through how to configure permissions?
Yep, I'm going to get to that. And I know I told everybody to list out questions and I would answer them at the end. So I'm guessing a lot of these had that in mind. But yes, I'll get to that guy at the end. Okay, yep, we will walk through that. Okay, so if the notion's still a little fuzzy in your head, it used to be, long in the days of yore, right, that there was this easy mode, that within a particular app workspace, say we had the sales app workspace and maybe the big accounts app workspace, anytime you wanted to build a report, a set of visuals, you would have to go construct a data set to tie into that report, right? So if you're a highly technical person and you don't think a lot in visuals, you still have to build both things, right? And if you're sort of, if your name's Stephen Few and you're big on data visualization, but maybe you don't know that much about building Power BI data sets, too bad. You still have to build the data set before you could build the report, and these two things are tied together, right? Now, there was sort of a half-baked solution for a while where within a single workspace, you could have the technical person build the data set, and then the non-technical person could build a report off of it, but this report would have to be in the sales workspace. So if somebody over here in the big accounts workspace wanted to build a report off of this data set, too bad, you didn't used to be able to do that. With the new solution, with shared and certified data sets, this highly technical person can build the data set here in the sales workspace. This report developer can build a report off of it, but they could do that before. What's more important is these folks over here in the big accounts workspace, both of them can connect to this shared and certified data set and build their reports off of it and be assured that all the calculations are being done correctly. And if you have to update things like measure calculations, this technical person can update it one time and it will fix this report, and this report. Any questions about that before I go on? Let people jump in. Okay. I tend to talk kind of fast, so I like to leave pauses for people. It's also a good reminder for me to breathe, which sometimes I forget to do. So we talk about shared and certified data sets as if they're the same thing, and they're not. They're actually two separate features that play very well together, right? Shared data sets are a feature that allow report authors to create a report based off an existing data set, even if the final report won't live in the same app workspace as the data set. That's sort of what I was describing over here, the big guts of it. You got a data set over here in this workspace, and these other folks can build reports off of it, even though the reports will live in a different workspace. That's the shared part, right? And frankly, it's kind of the most important part, but related and also quite important is the certified part, certified data sets. These are a feature that allow a potential report author to know how reliable a particular data set is, right? So if I'm a report author and I say, you know, I know they built this data set related to sales, maybe I want to build a report off it, how much can I trust it? Well, I can look at that data set and see that, oh yes, this data set has been certified by IT. IT did a review of the calculations, did a review of all the ETL work, and they said, this is fantastic. I could go ahead and build this thing and be very comfortable with it. Or I could say, well, it's not fully certified, but the person who built it has promoted it, so they say it's trustworthy. And then I get to ask myself the question, how much do I trust this particular person? But either way, you at least get some sort of a sense of how trusted this data set is, right? So let's talk about how you set this thing up. This is, in my ways, intellectually the least interesting part, but at the same time, in some ways, the most valuable. Where are the buttons to turn the thing on, right? Okay, so pretty easy. What you'll do is once you're in Power BI, you'll head up in the top right corner, there'll be a little gear icon. You'll open that up and you'll go to the admin portal. Now, this is all assuming you are a tenant admin for Power BI. If you're not, see if you can't track down the person who is. This is the process that they'll go through, or they maybe have already gone through, right? They'll click on the gearbox. They'll go to the admin portal where they set all the different, settings for your particular admin or for your particular tenant. They'll go to tenant settings. And down under workspace settings, there's this thing that says use datasets across workspaces, right? Now, if this is turned off, I don't know why you're listening to this presentation because you can't do anything with it, right? Until this little switch is turned on, there is no sharing across workspaces. You have to turn this thing on to get it to work. Now, when you turn it on, you will have an option down here to apply that particular property to the entire organization or specific security groups. Now, depending on your organization, it might be a good idea to actually do this second option. Why? Well, what you might want to do is say, hey, if you're going to use our shared and certified data sets, we want to go through maybe like a 30-minute training, maybe even a 15-minute training saying, what does it mean when we say a shared and certified data set? What's the difference between a certified data set and a promoted data set? And how do you know which one to trust? That way, people that are building reports off of these shared and certified data sets, they sort of know what they're doing. Now, if that sounds like a whole bunch of work and maybe not worth for your organization, well, obviously you could leave it to the entire organization. But it might be worthwhile, particularly if you're in a larger organization, to turn this on and maybe create an Active Directory group for maybe certified data set authors. And if you want to be a member of that group, in which case you're allowed to build off these certified data sets, you have to go through a short little training saying, here's what they are and here's how you use them, right? You don't have to, but it's probably a good idea, okay? Now that's for the using these shared data sets part. Related is the certification settings, right? Again, same spot here in tenant settings. You'll go down to certification, or your tenant admin will. They'll want to turn this on. It's usually a good idea if you have shared data sets to also turn on the certified process, right? And when you do, what you do not want to do is leave this box checked right here. Apply to the entire organization. If this box is checked, what that means is anybody that wants to certify a data set can do it, which kind of makes the process of certification pretty meaningless, right? The entire idea is you're going to have a handful of people around your organization who are allowed to say, yes, this is good, or no, this stinks, go fix it and come back. And you want to make that a small group of people. So you very definitely want to turn this on for the certification process and go create an Active Directory group that says, here are the people within my organization who are allowed to certify these things. Now, depending on your organization, that might be a very small group, or it might even be a medium-sized group, but it will certainly not be the entire organization, right? Okay, so any questions about that? Anybody tried to turn it on for the entire organization and have some good horror stories that we can recount and chat about?
I see a question. If enabling is off, can you choose to turn it on when the data set is ready to be shared?
So this is for the entire, I assume we're talking about the previous slide right here where we're turning on the sharing part. This is for the entire organization, right? So if this is, you could have a data set, and once this gets turned on, you will be able to share that data set, right? And I guess to answer the question more directly, yeah, you could go ahead and stage a data set and then turn this thing on. And once it's on, after that process, you will be able to share it with other folks. Then there's a two-step process. It's not quite as simple as if you have a data set, everybody in your organization is able to view it. They have to have what's called build permission. So before you can do any of that stuff, you'll have to turn this on for your tenant. But once you do, you will be able to, on usually a data set by data set basis, say, here's the people who are allowed to build off of this data set. Let me know if that answers the question or does not answer the question. And I see chat up there. Maybe I should go look at it. Although Greg's doing a pretty good job of checking it for me.
You're good, brother.
I'm good. All right, I'm going to keep on plowing through then. Rock and roll. Okay. Okay, so once you turn all that stuff on, the certifying experience is ridiculously easy, right? Assuming that you're in that group of people that's allowed to certify the data sets, right? If you have a data set and you've reviewed it and it turns out all the DAX is good and all the ETL is good and all that other stuff is good, all you do is open up the data set, click the little triple ellipsis right there and go to settings, right? And in the settings section, you'll have your scheduled refresh and your Q&A questions. And right underneath that, you will have the endorsement, right? And you will have the option of upgrading from the default, which is what it will be by default, to either promoted or certified. And I should say specifically, you will have the option of setting it to certified. Anybody can promote their data set. A promoted data set just means I've published this data set and I think it's pretty good and I think you should be able to build off of it. Certified means IT or some official process has been gone through such that organizationally we have decided that this is a certified data set. Only if you're in that group will you be able to actually certify a data set. Okay. Now, once you certify a data set, suddenly when somebody opens up Power BI Desktop and tries to connect to all the existing data sets in your org, you will get a really nice experience, right? The person will open up Power BI Desktop, they'll go to Get Data, they'll go to Power Platform, or I don't know, they change the wording of this thing every 2 weeks. Right now, I believe it's Power Platform. In there, more importantly, you'll see Power BI Datasets. You'll go ahead and double click on that, and you'll get this much nicer experience. This is way nicer than the old one, right? And what you will see is a list of all of the datasets that you were allowed to connect to, right? Now, there will be a lot of datasets that aren't even promoted. Nobody said it's a good idea to connect to these things. You can pretty much safely ignore those. But up above those will be a list of promoted data sets where the person who built the data set thinks that it's pretty good. And then up at the top, most importantly, will be all of these certified data sets. These are all of the data sets that IT or whoever has said it's okay to use these for official reporting within your organization, right? And it's really kind of nice that these things float to the top. That way people, they don't have to search through here to find the most valuable data sets. They just float right to the top. Now, obviously, they can also sort by name and owner, but the default sorting is by endorsement. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. So when you connect, right, you double click on that little icon on the previous screen, you'll get something that looks a little bit like a regular old Power BI desktop, but there will be some changes. First thing you will probably notice is that, well, this is the old toolbar, I should say, so it's a little bit different now. But the Edit Queries button and the Enter Data button, Recent Sources, Get Data, all that stuff will be disabled, right? Because the entire idea is you are connecting to an existing data set. You can't modify the ETL process. Somebody has done that for you. You don't get to change it, right? Also, over here on the left, where you had the little button where you could go look at your data tables, and you had the one down here where you could go look at all your tables and the relationships between them. Those are gone as well, again, because the entire idea is you connect to this data set, you get to use it, but you don't have any say in how it's built. You just get to use it to build reports, right? Down at the bottom, it will tell you we are connected live to a Power BI data set. It'll give you the name of the data set you're connected to, right? And then over here on the right, all the different measures and dimensions in that data set will be instantly visible. And an end user, report author, will be able to drag and drop things here into the canvas, and the visuals will instantly get built. Now, it'll take an extra second, usually the first time you do it, because, and this part is important, the data model, you haven't made a copy of it that lives on your machine. There is no copy. You're connecting live to the version that's sitting in the cloud. So if I were to drag, product name in here and then drag sales in there, this visual will spin for a second because it's sending a request out to Power BI service to say, hey, go build me this visual on this data set. The data set says, all right, here's where the data looks like, and then Power BI will draw it. So it's a live connection to one and only one data set living in the cloud, right? So I see there's one or two questions over there. Greg, are those questions for now or for later? Anybody want to jump in?
All right. Can you add new measures?
You can. Very good question. I'll get to that in a bit more detail later. But so you cannot add calculated columns, which you may or may not think is a good thing. I try and teach people not to use calculated columns, so I think it's kind of a good thing. You can, however, add measures. I would like to see a feature at some point in the future where you could disable this for connecting to these shared and certified data sets. But as of right now, any data set that you can connect to, you can build your own report level measures on there. Now, I say report level Because if I build a measure called, I don't know, Brian Sales, whatever it is, that measure will live here within this particular PBIX file. It will not get added to the data set in the cloud. So other people will not be able to look at or use that measure, which is kind of a good thing because oftentimes you'll have measures that only make sense for your particular report. So it actually works out quite well. Okay, any other questions? All right, so when you publish this thing to the cloud, you will get something that probably confuses you just a little bit. You're going to create a report off of this shared and certified data set. You're going to publish it to a completely different workspace, right? And then when you go to that workspace and you go to the data set section, you would assume that there's no data set because the data set goes and lives in a different app workspace. And yet, here is a data set for that, that shared and certified data set. But if you look real close, if you look at the icon, notice there's a little, like 2 chains right there. This is actually just a reference to the data set that lives in a different workspace. So don't worry, a copy hasn't been made, right? The actual data set lives in some other workspace, but in this particular workspace, there's just a little pointer to it in the data set section, right? Now, it used to be you couldn't delete this. Nowadays, you actually can. If you delete the report associated with it, this will go away as well, which is nice because it was kind of goofy there for a while. These things would just sort of hang around. Okay. So, grooming the data sets. This is very important. Enabling all this stuff is very easy. I just kind of showed you how to do it. You just click a few buttons and it just sort of works. But if you're going to build one of these shared and certified data sets, you don't build it the same way that you would build any old data set. You have to think a little bit harder about it. So before we actually get into that, I would like to point out that there is a difference between a menu and an inventory at a restaurant. What do I mean by that? If I go into a restaurant and I pick up a menu, let's say I go to a Hero Will Rise sandwiches or some sandwich shop, right? I'll see a menu that has some stuff on it, right? I could choose which bread I want for my sandwich. I could choose which protein, if I want roast beef or field roast tofu. I could pick my veggies. I could pick my toppings. This is a list of all the things that I might want to have in my sandwich, right? This is a menu. This makes sense to me as a customer. There might also be in the back of the restaurant a station checklist, right? Where for each station, you've got the things at this station. So here for the first station, which is the starting station, you've got different kinds of loaves of bread. You've got a bread slicer. Here in the protein station, you've got your different proteins. You've even got some sanitizing spray, right? And here in the finishing station, you've got, mustard and mayo and knife, right? If you walk into the restaurant, though, you want to see this menu over here on the left. You do not want to see this checklist over on the right. Sure, you could probably look at this checklist and be smart enough to assume that you can't get a sandwich, with sanitizing spray in it, or you can't get a sandwich, between 2 loaves of bread slicer, right? But you don't want to do that. You just want to be presented with all the things that make sense to you. So if you're going to make a menu, it's different than this checklist, right? A lot of these things are going to get removed, and a lot of them are going to be renamed to have nice, meaningful names. A customer doesn't want to see Acme Loaf Bread Wheat, Acme Loaf Bread Sourdough. They just want to see wheat or sourdough, right? This is going to be a menu that makes sense for them. Okay, so this is pretty similar to a semantic model, right? If you think about a data set, there's a lot of things in a data set, but a lot of those things, an end user, and by that I mean a report author, doesn't know what they are, doesn't want to know what they are. They don't care. They're non-technical folks, right? So if I've got like a dim stores table, right? First off, what's this dim stores? Now, if you're a professional data model, you go, oh yeah, well it's the dimension table. But nobody other than us cares about that kind of stuff, right? The person who's building the report just wants to see stores, right? And they don't want to know what a store ID is. That doesn't make any sense to them. You want to hide this, right? So when they look at the data set, they just see the store name. They don't see the store ID, right? And here where you've got the state, right? In the original data set, you can have something like the store administrative district L1, level 1. Well, yeah, I guess if you're building the data set, you happen to know that that means the same thing as a state, right? But most people don't know that. You would want to rename this with all of these ugly underscores and all this ugly uppercaseness and all this technical jargon. You want to rename it to something that makes sense to end users like state and country and product name and category, right? That, more important than anything else, is the process of building a semantic model. That way, when a report author opens up the data set, they don't see all of the technical stuff. All they see is questions that make sense to them and categories that make sense to them, right? That's the process of building an enterprise semantic model. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's talk about this kind of thing a little bit more. When we say a well-groomed semantic model, basically what we're asking is, how does the data model appear to report authors? I guess appears to report authors, there's a typo. How does the data model appear to report authors? Does it look nice to them, or does it look really ugly? Good is a menu for summary tables, right? When they see the data model, all they see is the questions they care about and the categories they care about. They don't know that underneath all that stuff is tables and sorting columns and all kind of stuff. They just see questions and categories, right? Bad, what you don't want to do is just a list of everything in the model, right? With big technical names, because that doesn't make sense to folks. So how do you get from bad to good? Well, there's some properties you're going to be looking for. You're going to want to make sure that you hide mechanical columns, right? Things like sorting columns, or if you have like keys, you'll hide those. You want to make sure that you use friendly names with spaces. So no stuff with a whole bunch of underscores and all caps. That's ugly. You want to have names that make sense to people. We're going to add descriptions in folders. We're going to make sure that if we've got measures, they're context-safe measures. So if you use them in the wrong place, they'll automatically blank themselves out. And we'll even do things like add some measure tables. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, Brian, you're going through this list kind of fast. I am, because these 5 little checkboxes are the next 5 slides. So we're actually going to explore these in a little bit of detail, right? So let's go to the first one, mechanical columns, right? So there may be a lot of columns that are mechanical in nature. Some of them we'll want to get rid of, and other ones we'll want to just hide, right? So if you've got key or ID or code columns that form relationships between tables but don't have any business meaning to an end user, you'll want to hide those. So store ID, nobody knows what that is, right? And most business users won't. So we'll go ahead and hide things like that, right? If there's sorting columns, right? So we have our store names, but we want them to appear in a certain order within our reports. So we added a store name sort column that we could sort this column by. Well, cool, we don't want to delete that column. We need it so that this thing will sort correctly, but end users don't want to see that. We're going to want to hide that column, right? If there are columns in measured tables that are just sort of dummy columns, right, you want to hide those as well. If you've got measures that are still under construction, right, they're about 80% of the way there, but they're not finished yet, you'll want to hide those as well. You also want to make sure you delete any unneeded columns. So like if you bring in your gym stores table, and it's got like a point of sales server, nobody cares about that. Point of sales version, nobody cares about that. Go ahead and delete those columns just to clean things up a fair amount, right? And where possible, you'll actually want to hide entire fact tables, right? So if you've got a fact sales table, what you'll actually want to do is you want to make sure that you've got measures for things like total sales and total margin percentage. All of the things that you would calculate based on that fact sales table, you should expose those as measures, and then you could actually hide the fact sales table. That's sort of a good best practice. The reason you do that is you want to make sure that if you've got a calculation for a margin, right, that it's being encapsulated in a measure. That way, if you're accidentally pointing at the wrong margin column, like let's say that you're using raw margin, you should be using adjusted margin. Well, if you've got a measure, it's very quick and easy to change the way that calculation works. And report authors have no idea that you've fixed anything. They just wake up one morning and the calculation seems to be working a little bit better, right? You'll also want to, hide numeric columns that are being aggregated with measures, which is sort of why we hide fact tables. So if you've got a total sales measure, you want to be sure you hide the sales column in the fact table, right? That way there's only one way to answer the question. You also want to try to have very few or no visible numeric columns and have measures instead, right? So again, if you've got a business question, what is this? What is what is total sales? What is the number of returning customers? Don't let people drag and drop numeric columns into visuals. Create measures instead. If it's worth thinking about as a business question, you should expose it as a business question. Create a measure. So, okay, that's the hiding part of it, and to do it, it's pretty easy. You go in here to the, I call this the International Space Station. Technically, it's the relationship viewer, right? And there you could click, I just tend to control click on several columns at once, and I'll click the little is hidden thing, and those columns will be hidden, and end users will not see them. In case there's a question out there already floating around, if I hide these columns, or if I hide a measure that's still in progress, does that mean end users can't use it or can't see it? Well, it means that when they open the data set up by default, they won't be able to see it. However, they will be able to right-click anywhere in the tree and select View Hidden Items, and they'll still be able to see them and potentially use them. So if you've got a column in there like Social Security numbers, don't hide it thinking that you're going to keep it away from report authors. No. If you've got something that's actually secure, you want to delete it or find some other way around the problem. This is just hiding those columns, so when they go and look at the data set initially, they only see the stuff that is most important to them. Okay, it's an important distinction. Okay, friendly names. I can't stress this enough. If you're building an enterprise semantic model, you want to make sure that your names don't suck, right? So if you've got names that are in all caps, for goodness sake, don't use all caps, right? Change something like store city to just city. Make the first letter capitalized and the other letters lowercase. If you've got underscores, get rid of those underscores too, right? Nobody wants to see that kind of stuff. If you've got no spaces between words, you've got kind of this Pascal casing, you want to get rid of that too. Make sure that you've got sort of spaces between things. Makes things a whole lot better. Also, if you've got measures, don't give them highly technical names. Like, oh, the way that this measure works is it takes the sum of the sales column in the fact sales table. Therefore, I will call this measure sum fact sales dot sales. No. If you're still building the data set, you could go ahead and get away with that. By the time you publish this thing, though, you need to rename this to something that people are going to care about. Total sales $sign. If a person sees that, they know what it means and they can go ahead and use it. Okay. Any questions about that? I saw one or two questions sort of pop up. They may be end of the presentation questions.
Somebody made a great tip that you can hide those measures in the not built right yet measures table.
That's a fine way to do it too. Yeah, I find in my experience, first off, you should do that. You can often have a couple different measure tables, and I'll show you how to build those in a second. In my experience, people are actually pretty good about the fact that if they see that something is hidden, they understand that it isn't for use, that they can use it, but they probably shouldn't. And usually in your official process, and I'll get to this as well, if you use hidden assets, you essentially void any certification that your report has. Say, yeah, I know you're using a certified data set, but you're using stuff that's under construction. Therefore, you can't use this in production reporting, right? But yes, that's a great tip. That's a really good tip. Okay, folders and descriptions, right? So if you've got a measures table, which I'll show you how to build in a second, you could dump all of your measures just into a table and have a big long list. And if you've only got 12, 15 measures, that might work fine. As you get more and more measures, though, you're going to want to organize them, right? And so what you'll do is you'll click on a measure, or multi-click, control click to select multiple measures, and in the display folder property, right, you'll be able to set a chain, a path of folders and subfolders. So if in here I type in A sales /B time intelligence, when this is exposed to end users, right, they will see this total sales YTD measure under the sales folder and the time intelligence subfolder. This is a really great way to keep things organized, right? And be sure when you do this to harness control clicking. So if you've got several measures that belong in this particular display folder, control click several of them at once and do them all at the same time. You save yourself a whole lot of headache, right? Also, related, add descriptions to your measures, right? By the time you have like 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 of these measures, the names are going to get kind of compact because you don't want names that are 18 words long. So it'll be like total sales, YTD. You'll be tempted to add as much description as possible to the actual name itself. Don't do that. If you've got a longer description, add it to the description part, right? If you put it in here, when a person hovers over the measure, that description will pop right up and they'll say, oh, I get it. Sales year to date in US dollars. It includes pending sales. Ah, I understand, right? You can include a whole lot of information in the description. This description, I think, is super duper important for measures, but it also works for columns and things like that too. So if you've got a column like, oh, I don't know, store last update, you could say, well, what do we mean by update? Like, how are we defining that? You could put that in a column, and you could even put it in a table. And it'll just, same exact thing. Whenever you hover over the asset, that description will pop right up. right? How do you create the subfolders in case I haven't mentioned that? Notice total sales YTD is under both sales and B time intelligence. That's what the backslash does in the path name, right? You do just have to type it in, but you get pretty good at it. Anybody who remembers back to the good old DOS days, this will be very familiar to those folks. Other questions I should ask before I plow on through?
Yeah, there was a longer question. So for shared data sets, Brian,
yes.
Approach for, you know, at the workspace level, or let's say if there's a different function oriented in shared workspaces, are you managing permissions at the workspace level or at the data set level?
I'll get into it later, but I generally recommend the data set level. If you do it through the workspace level, you kind of throw away the meaning of a workspace, because everybody who wants to work on a particular data set, you add them to the workspace, and that ends up creating kind of a security nightmare. Doing it at the data set level is usually the best way to do that, and I'll get into that a bit more in a little bit. Good question, though. Good question. Okay, so we're going to keep on plowing through. Safe measures. What do I mean by that? If you've got a measure, right, it will often be the case that the measure will return a number where it probably shouldn't. So if I've got a measure like total sales YTD, right, and I don't do anything special with it, I just use the regular old dates YTD sort of pattern to solve the problem. If I just do that, I'll end up getting a number in the grand total. Many of you have probably seen this before, right? Where you use a sales YTD calculation and there's some weird goofy number hanging out in the grand total. The way most people fix it is by, of course, turning off the grand total. And yeah, that works if you're in charge of both the data set and the report. But if you're building a model for end users, you want to make sure that your measures are smart enough to do some checking and say to themselves, hey, wait a minute, if I've got this sales YTD calculation, I'm going to perform a validity check. I'm going to make sure that there's only one visible year for whatever cell that I'm in. That way, if I'm at the year level or at the quarter level, well, the calculation year to date makes sense, so go ahead and do the regular calculation. But if I'm here in the grand total level, I've got 1, 2, 3 visible years. Therefore, right, rather than showing my regular calculation, I'll just show a blank like I've got right here, right? So those validity checks are really essential to make sure that when people use measures in places that don't necessarily make sense, rather than getting a goofy answer, you get a blank, which is usually better. Sometimes you want to show a 0 or something like that, but I think blank tends to work out. Here's sort of the pop quiz section of this. Can anybody spot? I've solved one problem with this particular calculation. Right now, I'm not seeing a calculation in the total. Can anybody spot another sort of bit of goofiness in the way that this measure is currently defined? And as a hint, it's about 1 centimeter above where my mouse is currently. We'll see if anybody can find it. And we may be here for hours if nobody's looking. So please, look. Save the class hours of waiting. Anybody spot it? Oh, I see stuff up there. Did you guys get it? I bet you did. Come on, chat. Come on.
I'm seeing people say Q3 equals Q4.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So the big issue here, there's a couple issues. The biggest one is that this calculation for Q3 is equal to Q4. Now, the reason for this is, in reality, the data set is old, right? So in this particular data set, the last day for which we have sales is in Q3. Now, technically speaking, the year-to-date sales for Q4 includes Q3, so that's not accurate. But usually you'd want to perform some additional validity check logic to say, well, wait a minute, is this a quarter that's been completed yet? Because if the quarter is in the future, we would also want to show a blank, right? So it can actually get quite complicated to handle all the corner cases. In reality, you want to try and find the most common ones and solve those kinds of problems. But this is a very important problem to think about because it'll definitely confuse people if you don't solve at least some of the big ones, right? Any other questions about that? I love variables, by the way, in DAX. Variables are great. Use them all the time. Saw a question up there? End of the conversation question? Let's see.
Yeah. How do you fix the year-to-date calc from repeating? I think you could do a whole class on that.
Yeah, I could do a whole class on that. On this particular, what I would probably do, if I had a calculation like this, what I would do is I would add an additional validity check where I would check to see if first off, I would use something called a relative date. The entire idea behind a relative date in a calendar is that in a particular calendar table, which should refresh every single day, today is 0, yesterday is -1, and the day before that is -2, and tomorrow is 1, and the day after that is 2, right? So the idea is for a particular cell, I would do a check to say, well, wait a minute, go find the very first day in this particular cell. Like here in Q4, it would find the first day in Q4 of 2018. And it would say, what is that? I guess that would be, was it October 1st of 2018? And it would say, okay, for October 1st of 2018, what is the relative day? And if that number is positive, like 24, oh, I get it. The start of Q4 is 24 days in the future. Well, if it's 24 days in the future, we would want to show a blank right here. So, I'd obviously write that out in DAX, but that would be the generalized approach. For a particular cell, go see if the first day is in the future. If the first day of that cell is in the future, then you would want to go ahead and blank it out using a very similar pattern as right here. I could put on my salesman hat and sell my DAX training class, which I do offer. It's quite good, by the way. And we will show you how to solve problems like that. But in general, the more important thing for this particular presentation is that you want to make sure you at least think about those kinds of problems. And any questions about that? Going once, going twice. Okay. Also, add comments to your code, please, for goodness sake. If you've got code that's doing all of this stuff, use the little double slashes to say, hey, here's what I'm doing in this step. Hey, here's what I'm doing in this step. It'll make your coworkers' lives much easier. Also, when you have to come back 9 months from now and figure out what it is you were trying to do, it will make your life much easier as well. Okay. Oop. Come on, PowerPoint. There, you can do it. Measure tables. Measure tables are fantastic. So if you've got a measure, it has to live in a table. That's just the way that they built DAX. But from my point of view, I tend to not want to put my measures in my dimension tables or even my fact tables. I like to have dedicated tables where my measures live. And there's several ways to do it. The easiest, though, is you'll just go to home and you'll hit the little enter data button. You don't even have to type anything here. If you want to, you could rename the column, report measures, go here, do that if you want to, or you can just leave it column 1. The important part is here in name, you'll type in either 1 data model measures or 2 report measures or 3 measures in progress, whatever you want to call the table where your measures live. Then you'll just hit the load button and it'll make a nice little table in your data set that you can add your measures to. It'll be super duper convenient for people who are building reports, right? Super easy, super easy. Okay, so I recommend, this isn't part of Power BI's architecture, but I recommend that if you've got certified data sets, that you have some sort of tiering process for the certification. If you are a small to medium-sized business, this may be unnecessary. If you're a large or particularly a very large business, don't just have data sets are certified or not certified. Have different tiers to say, well, what do we mean? How certified are they? What does it mean for this thing to be certified? So in my sort of thing that I've got listed here, we've got 3 tiers. And basically what a tier denotes, the number is who is certifying this. So for tier 3, we have sort of this team's version of the truth. So we're saying that this particular data set, which we just put like a tier 3 in the name of it, that is backed up by this particular team. This team says, we've reviewed this data set and we think it's pretty good. And that's okay, but it's not fantastic. If you move up to a tier 2, we'll say that this is this department's version of the truth, right? The department has reviewed this data set and the department stands behind these numbers. And lastly, you'll have a tier 1 certified data set. That is this company's version of the truth. This particular data set has gone through a much bigger, broader vetting process. We've made sure all the measures work in every single possible scenario. This is the rock solid tier that you could build, C-suite reports off of. This other stuff is good, but our most important reports are built off of this tier 1 certification. The advantage of using this tiered system too is you can have different requirements for how stringent these things are. If you've got a tier 1 certified data set, you want to make sure that only a very small number of measures get in here and a small number of dimensions, because everything has to work and be just lightning fast and absolutely trustworthy. As you sort of go down the list, especially as you get down here into tier 3, stuff should be pretty good. You don't want to be, kind of super sloppy about it, but you can have a larger number of measures that are designed to work for individual reports. You could have extra dimensions that are probably, too many. But it doesn't matter because there's less writing on it. As you move sort of up the list, this stuff needs to be smaller and faster because it is this company's version of the truth, sort of that highest level. Right? You don't have to do this, but I think it's a good idea. What fancy piece of architecture or what fancy piece of machinery to use to have these tiers? You just put the word tier 3 in the name, or tier 2 or tier 1. Sorry, nothing more complicated than that. But that tends to work pretty darn well. Okay, promoting. So the certification process says that some team or something stands behind the data set. Any data set can be promoted. And by that, that just means the person who built the data set says, hey, I think other people should use this. And that's not bad, but the vetting process for this is extremely informal. In fact, it's so informal, it's not really a process. It's just a person saying, yeah, I think this is okay. These promoted data sets can be used within your organization, but you should really push the notion that if you're going to build a report used that it's read by multiple people, make sure you use a certified report. Otherwise, you know, like you're just using your friend's data set and who knows how good it is, right? That's the kind of thing we want to get away from, okay? It's not bad, it's just spend a lot more time building out your infrastructure for certification. It's a much better process. Okay, so I'm gonna do a time check here, make sure I'm doing good on time. Okay, well, I'm the only presenter tonight, so I could sort of eat up as much time as I want, but I'll try and speed things out for people that are gonna go watch some Netflix or something after this. But there's a few good sections left, so please stay on the line. So
yeah, nobody's kicking us out of the venue yet. No
good.
problems there.
Yeah, well, so my partner may be kicking me out at some point because I think we have some dessert cooking, but I think I've still got some time for that. So when you're building a data set, you have trade-offs to make based on the properties of reliability and flexibility. And I really want to emphasize the notion of trade-offs when we say this. If you want to increase reliability, that is going to require less flexibility. If you want to increase flexibility, that will decrease reliability. For any particular data set, you have to pick which sort of combination of those two things you want. You don't get to have them both, right? So as you increase reliability, people will often think, oh, well, reliability is obviously the most important one. I should just maximize that. Well, as you increase reliability, especially as you increase it further and further, the costs get pretty darn big, right? These costs are going to include things like having fewer measures. You're going to have to avoid complicated ones. You're going to have a very small number of data sources. You're not going to be able to mash things up nearly as well. You're going to have fewer dimensions. Also, this stuff's going to take a whole lot more developer time if you want to climb up this curve to the most reliable stuff. Now, if you're building like a tier 1 data set, well, maybe that's worth it, but it's not correct to think that this is the best place to be on the curve. It depends what's more valuable to you. It might be that you need to build something quickly that you could build several reports off of pretty fast, in which case heading down here to this flexible route might actually be better. That might be a better choice for you, right? So with that in mind, I really do want to emphasize trying to only have data sets with near perfect reliability is not actually a smart goal, right? You do want to have some data sets that are really super duper reliable. These are your certified tier 1 data sets, right? But in general, you're also going to have a lot of stuff along this curve. And as sort of a rule of thumb, I would say that your certified data sets, those will make up about 10% of the data sets of your organization. So these 3-tiered certifications right up here, the most reliable data sets, really they only make up about 10% of your data sets. Maybe you'll have like 20% of your data sets be promoted and then not endorsed. Most of your data sets are going to be these. Because in reality, most reports end up requiring mashups. And if you want to do mashups or you want to do weird stuff or write kind of sloppy DAX that just works for an individual report, you're going to have to come all the way down here. Like that's just a reality of it. So don't think up here is better and down here is worse. They just serve different needs, right? For top level reporting, you want super reliable data sets. But for a lot of your day-to-day reports, you want super duper flexible data sets. A good enterprise will have both. Will have both. Okay. So data flows, right? So a data flow is basically like Power Query in the cloud, right? So if you've got a table, like let's say an AND semantic model and a MEL semantic model, they both have a products table. They could build these products tables independently, but what would be a whole lot better is to have a centralized products table that they can both use. That way they're not duplicating the effort of each individually building a products table and getting into arguments about whose product table is better. So what you will do is you will construct a data flow inside your organization. And a data flow, again, it's sort of like Power Query in the cloud. And in that data flow, you'll have a products entity, which is basically just a table that sits in Power BI. That way, when Anne and Mel go to build their semantic models, their data sets, they can load from this products table, and the products tables will both have the exact same design, right? You save a lot of time because you're not both doing the process, and you ensure that if you have a products table, it's consistent across both semantic models, right? Pretty darn easy to do and a pretty good idea as well. I saw some questions up there. Let's see. Let me pop up here. Come on, buddy. Let's see. Go to.
Revenue, man.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, good.
We have with the certified datasets exposed to all pro users and free users, how to restrict users accessing the certified dataset. You answered this one already.
We're coming up there, so I'm going to sort of hold you hostage and just sort of keep on my spiel about data flows before we get to that section, which is coming up soon. So don't worry too much. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that as well. Yep. Now, one thing that you will find as an organization is actually coming up with a products table. That sounds easy. It's actually super duper hard, especially if you're a big organization, because different people think about products quite differently. If you are in charge of maybe forecasting, you do all your forecasts at a pretty high level. You don't need to actually get down to the SKU. So in your mind, what would be a good products table? Just list one row per product, the way a customer would think about a product. But if you're in charge of manufacturing, not only do you have to go down to the SKU, you might have to go below that. You might want to find out, per SKU, per factory. Your products table might need to go down to that granularity. There's a lot of discrimination on what makes a product table. So in situations like that, I recommend come up with a snowflake, which is to say, don't worry about knocking out this products table. That's going to take 18 months. Go find a higher granularity table that people can agree on, right? So instead of trying to figure out what the products are, maybe try and figure out what the product lines are. And that might be a very much smaller table that everybody can agree on. You could go ahead and roll that thing out in like a week or two. And that way, while you're hashing out what your products table is, people can at least get used to the idea of pulling in a common table from someplace like a data flow or a data warehouse. That can work too, right? So generalized versus operational data set. When you're building a data set, you generally want to build the generalized data sets. These are designed to handle a very broad range of questions, which is to say you will have a pretty good sized number of measures that handle lots of different subject areas, and it's designed to answer them across many different categories and dimensions. This is different than an operational data set. An operational data set generally has very targeted questions. So these will be things like a data set that has a list of customers that we need to call because they haven't bought anything from us in a while. Technically, it's a data set, but it doesn't handle a generalized series of questions. It handles like one question, like who are our customers that might churn, things like that, or what are deliveries that are late. These are valid data sets, but they're very operational in nature, and they handle targeted questions. These kind of operational data sets, consider turning those into data flows, because really they're just often single flat tables anyways. And focus on building generalized data sets that handle a large number of questions. Okay, so analysis services, should you still use it? Well, we're running a little late on time, so my answer will be, if you're already using analysis services, you probably won't migrate your analysis services model to a shared and certified data set. If you haven't built an analysis services model, you might not spend a whole lot of time researching building that. You'll probably want to go ahead and do a shared and certified data set. It'll be a lot easier to start with, and you can always sort of migrate it up to analysis services.
Hey, Brian, one thing I want to pause you on.
Yes.
I know there's a capability being rolled out. I don't know if it's rolled out yet or not, but that we can mash up with SSAS models or certified data sets. Do you know if that's been done yet?
That has not been done yet. That's still in the works. I would probably expect at the end of this year, we'll start to hear some more smutterings about that. It's pretty hard nut to crack, but yeah, they are working on it. They are working on it. Okay, so build permission. Hey, I'm done holding you guys as hostage. So how do you set the build permission? There's basically 3 ways to do it. You could set direct permission, which is the one I encourage. Yay! You could also do it via workspace membership, which I discourage. Boo! You could also do it through app subscriptions, which occasionally is a good idea, but you want to be kind of careful about it. So let's just sort of go through these. I've got a slide for each one. What do I mean by direct permission, right? So if you've got a particular data set, you could click on that data set's options and go to manage permissions. And in here, you could add users directly and say, hey, for a particular data set, who's allowed to use it? I could do individual people, or I can do Active Directory groups. I think this is the best way to do it, because with this, you could have an app workspace called Shared and Certified Datasets, put them all on that app workspace, and on a data set by data set basis, get very granular with who is allowed to use what. I think this is very easy to manage, and still gives you a lot of flexibility, right? When you add users, be sure to uncheck allow recipients to reshare the artifact. Otherwise, they will be able to add people too. You don't want that. But this is the place where you want to add people, right? This is the best way to do it. The way I don't recommend doing it is by adding people to the actual app workspace. The reason I don't recommend that is because a lot of times you won't want them in the app workspace, because if they're in the app workspace, they can do things like delete the data set, right? You might want to have an app workspace called all of my shared and certified data sets and have different sharing permissions, but you don't want to let people into that workspace because they could delete things, they could download the PBX file, make some changes, re-upload it, and mess up all the measures. That's just sort of a bad way to go, right? I don't recommend that. If you're a very small organization, this might work fine, but for medium or large organizations, I would steer clear of this. The last one, which is kind of interesting, is when you go to publish an app, you will see these two checkboxes, which you've probably been confused about before. Allow users to connect to the app's underlying data set using the build permission, and allow users to make a copy of this report in the app. If you turn this on, anybody who has access to the app suddenly has build permission to the underlying data sets. If you, in this particular app, are only working with tier 1 data, this might be a good idea because, hey, maybe people want to build off of this thing. But under any other circumstances, I would say almost always turn these off, because it's better to manage on a data set by data set level. And, you know, you don't want all the data sets to be exposed to end users, because they will go find all the corner cases and they'll just mess everything up. I really generally recommend sharing at the data set level. I think that's the best way to go. Okay. So a few last gotchas. This only works for new workspaces, right? So if you have a V1 workspace and you publish a data set in that V1 workspace, you will not be able to share it across workspaces. Thankfully, Microsoft has produced a new migration tool that makes moving the workspace from V1 to V2 pretty darn easy. So it's only sort of a gotcha. Performance. If these shared data sets are feeding a ton of different reports, they might slow down, particularly if you use some kind of gnarly and inefficient DAX. So because so many people are using them offer so many reports, you may have to optimize your data set, which is it's sort of a good problem to have. It means people are actually using it, but it is something to think about. Report measures. This one was asked for before. Anybody that is building a report off of a shared and certified data set can add their own DAX measures to the report. They live within that report. They don't live in the data set. But you should make clear to authors and viewers that if you use a report scope DAX measure, that's going to invalidate its certified status, right? It could still be right, but that is no longer guaranteed. Now, that's sort of a gotcha. The last gotcha is this one right here. This is actually the biggest one right now. When you share a shared and certified data set, you want to make sure you get the names of columns correct. Measures too, but especially columns. The reason being, let's say that I've got a column called store name. It's misspelled. I should have put in name, but I put in N-A-N-E, right? And I share that data set, and 100 different people build reports using store name. Everybody knows what store name means, right? And I say, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and fix it. I will go in there. I will rename store name to store name. When I republish it, all of those reports are going to break because they're all looking for a column called store N-A-N-E, which no longer exists. And as of right now, and this is kind of a bummer, as of right now, there's no good way to remap those broken assets. You have to do it on a visual by visual basis, and even that kind of stinks. My guess would be in the future, Power BI and Microsoft will offer sort of a tool that says, oh, hey, look, your asset's broken. How would you like to repoint that? I think that's coming down the road, but it's not here yet, which is to say, make sure that when you, before you go ahead and publish a shared and certified data set, that you get the names extra right. That's the one thing that's very, very hard to fix if you have to fix. And with that, I think that's it. I think, hey, look, questions. And I think there's a couple questions. So what other questions do we have? What questions do folks have?
There was a great question. So let's say you have a shared data set that's two different reports, dashboards. Do those, are you creating more